Currently in New Zealand, there is quite a lot of divisive rhetoric. New Zealanders are possibly increasingly divided on public discourse and public rhetoric in a way.
So today we are joined by a remarkable guest, Melissa Darby, New Zealand's Race Relation Commissioner based in Tauranga. Dr. Darby's work sits at the intersection of human rights, cultural integrity and social equity. With an academic background from the University of Waikato and the University of Canterbury and a deep commitment to Koapa Morai values, she's leading important national conversations about who we are and how we live together in a diverse society. Our topic is very important. Thank you so much, ma'am, giving your precious time and joining the podcast, this podcast RESO platform. You're sort of heading the Human Rights Commission in New Zealand and holding the post of commissioner there. It's such a wonderful possibility to have your precious time and see your insights. Our topic is certainly very, very important topic. It says bridging the divide, race, identity and justice in Aotearoa. So a wonderful topic. So would like to move on to my first question, which is certainly a very important question. And says the question is, first question, as the Race Relation Commissioner, what are the most pressing race-related challenges New Zealand is currently facing? How is the Commission addressing them?
Thank you. Well, first of all, thank you so much for having me here. It's a pleasure to be with you. Great first question. So currently in New Zealand, there is quite a lot of divisive rhetoric that we are seeing in our public spaces. New Zealanders are possibly increasingly divided on public discourse and public rhetoric in a way that we have been at other times in our history, but certainly it's becoming more apparent now. We, like many countries, I imagine, around the world, the impact of foreign conflicts on different groups living in New Zealand is certainly the impact of those are being felt, which is difficult for communities in New Zealand who have perhaps relocated here or who have been here for a very long time, who are facing some increasing pressure at the moment because of foreign conflicts overseas. There is some hope though, and one of the New Zealand data in the World Values Survey recently released, I think about 2 years ago, showed that New Zealanders are actually coming together more and more on our shared values. So perhaps they provide a pathway for bridging some of the gaps that we are seeing in terms of public discourse.
Thank you so much for responding this very, very important question, also sort of highlighting the fundamental and foundational possibilities and existential realities of human rights. Now would like to move on to my second question, a very important question once again. It says, how has your background in academia and your research influenced your approach to promoting equity, social justice at a national level?
Well, I'm fortunate to have had a sort of a grounding in academia, which I think if you're a good academic, you have the ability to think critically, to see issues in multiple ways, to look at all of the different factors that contribute to a particular outcome a person or a group faces. I did my master's study on aspects of history, so I'm aware in particular with my tribal group here in New Zealand, and I was fortunate in that regard to have a good understanding of the history of aspects of this country, which I think is useful, so that you're not just waking up one day without knowing where we were yesterday. In between my master's and PhD, I studied at Columbia University in New York in the Institute for the Study of Human Rights, and certainly bring the human rights framework and lens to my other work in academia, which obviously I'm no longer doing, at least for the time being. My PhD looked at children's early learning and development, but while that may seem a departure from sort of where I am now, I brought a human rights lens to that work. So looking at the concept of literacy as a human right really changed the conversation around, how we view this pretty vital skill, but also a tool we use across our lifespan to access other human rights, to improve our outcomes, to get better jobs, to carry on with lifelong learning, to engage in civic affairs, community engagements, and so on. I've worked with hundreds of families up and down the country in New Zealand, and what I saw in those contexts were that families were all very different. They all had different challenges, different opportunities, different advantages. But so with that in mind, we're not all the same, although of course we are, more similar in many respects than we are different. So I think that sort of that ability to look at things in a very nuanced way has stood me in good stead for this role. And of course, having that understanding of our country's history is also really important.
Thanks a lot for responding to this important question. Your background in research and academia. What I believe, like human rights, there are certainly legal and paralegal problems, but they're more a social problem. So in research and academia, we can sort of better arrive at some valid and scientific body of data. It may be quantitative and qualitative to make some proper strategies in addressing mechanisms. Thanks a lot. Would like to move on to my third question. Again, very important questions is you recently described being part of Kaupapa as fantastic. Could you share more about this Kaupapa and why it resonates with you?
Well, so I've been in the role now for 9 months, and really sort of hit the ground running this year in particular. And in that time, I've had the privilege of meeting diverse communities up and down the country, a range of different ethnicities, migrant, refugee, different religious and faith communities across New Zealand, some bigger organisations, some obviously smaller groups. I've been invited into people's homes, places of worship, community centres to hear from them about their experiences, particularly concerning racism in New Zealand, but more generally, some of their aspirations and hopes for their, for their lives and for their communities, which has been wonderful. I certainly don't take for granted people sharing either some challenging things with me or some very personal things. It's been such a privilege, and I'm very lucky to have the opportunity to serve my country in this way. With regards to the kaupapa that I described as fantastic, I think it was the signing of the Harmony Accord between some Jewish and Muslim communities recently in New Zealand. It was actually the work, and I want to acknowledge the Ministry for Ethnic Communities here in New Zealand and the Minister of Ethnic Communities who really drove that work. I was fortunate to be asked to speak on the day of the signing of the Harmony Accord, and really in a nutshell, the Accord is a commitment to open dialogue between groups, to making sure or doing our best to not let overseas conflicts in particular affect relationships between communities in New Zealand. That resonates with my focus as Race Relations Commissioner and my mandate on domestic affairs. Obviously, when New Zealand sits, like many countries, in the international human rights framework, but my focus is on the upholding and promoting human rights for communities in New Zealand. The Accord is certainly not a silver bullet. Unfortunately, few things are, but look, anything that takes us a step closer to peace and harmonious relations is certainly a good thing. So I see it very much in that light.
Thanks a lot for responding to this important question. It's very important to understand different dimensions, different perspectives and contexts, especially when it comes to human rights, because it's not just dynamic, it's super dynamic domain, once I figure out. Would like to move on to my fourth question, and very important question is, in a multicultural society like New Zealand, how can we strike a balance between preserving cultural identities and building a shared national identity?
Great question, and certainly one that I've been wrestling with since I took on this role. Like many countries around the world, New Zealand is becoming increasingly diverse. Auckland, one of our biggest city, is certainly one of the most, or the most diverse city in this part of the world, and possibly in the world generally. So how we respond to our increasing multiculturalism, our increasing diversity, is a really pertinent question. How do we do that, though, alongside a sense of unity where everybody feels included, where everybody feels like they belong here is very important, obviously, from our legislated mandate at the Human Rights Commission to promote harmonious relations between people and groups in New Zealand. We've had for a long time, possibly like many countries, quite a I suppose, laissez-faire approach to social cohesion and harmonious relations. I think that probably hasn't been wise. I think we need to be more deliberate and more intentional about not leaving social cohesion to chance. And look, I want to be clear when I talk about social cohesion, I don't mean that people should all be the same as one another, certainly not, but rather where we can be our different, unique selves, but all I guess sit down and have a cup of tea together at the end of the day, despite our differences. Some of the things, I guess, and this comes back to your earlier question as well with regards to how the Commission responds to challenges that New Zealand may be facing. I don't see diversity necessarily as a challenge, but certainly it is changing dynamics within this country. And one of the things that we're looking at the Human Rights Commission is a National Human Rights Action Plan. Part of that it has 3 strands: connect, promote, and protect. And my work very much sits under the connect strand, where I want to look at ways that we can bring together diverse communities to connect really on our shared humanity and all of the things that we actually have in common with each other. So there's an opportunity there to bring communities together under that sort of National Human Rights Action Plan. It's obviously in its preliminary stages. I think as well we need to look at the role that constructive conversations play. It's a focus of the board at the Human Rights Commission, our leadership, looking at how we can foster opportunities for different groups to get together and actually converse with one another, rather than us all entrenching into our silos, which is most unhelpful. But for me, my ultimate sort of goal, I guess, is to make sure that everybody sees themselves reflected in the story of New Zealand, whether we're a new migrant, whether we've been here generations, whether we're somewhere in between, so that people have that sense of belonging, which is obviously a key ingredient in harmonious relations.
Use the word social cohesion. It's very important because multicultural societies will have different dynamics, and it turns out to be a little complicated at times, sort of coordinating in terms of human rights. And now would like to move on to my 5th question, a very important question. What role do education and storytelling play in changing societal attitudes about race, and what practical steps can institutions take to support this?
Yeah, great question. So I'm probably a little biased given my background in education, but to me, I think education provides a huge opportunity for us to bridge gaps between different people. Yeah, I think education provides a great avenue or a vehicle for bringing different people together, for disseminating ideas. Obviously I've mentioned the storytelling sort of project that I'll be focusing on in the early stages of my term. And of course, that I come to this role with a storytelling background anyway. So I think that, we are narrative creatures. We see the world through story. So I think it's important for us to hear stories about one another, and that in many ways helps to combat negative or inaccurate narratives that may emerge about particular groups. In New Zealand at the moment, we're seeing a lot of divisive and unhelpful rhetoric and stories about migrants in particular. And that isn't good. So I think that we can get better stories out there. If I can share a story actually of my own about ways that conversing with different people from different backgrounds can actually bring people closer together. Some years ago, I was fortunate to be on a Fulbright scholarship in America, and I was in a group with different people from all different countries around the world, very diverse countries. I was the only person from New Zealand, and when I sat down at the table, we were talking about the different things that we have for breakfast. And of course, we come from different countries around the world, so we were all marveling at all of the different foods that we eat. When the session started, it was part of our orientation to America, so we were looking at goals, hopes, dreams, fears, and so on for our time in America. No matter what our differences were when we were discussing what we ate for breakfast, we all had exactly the same hopes and dreams and fears and concerns and anxieties and so on for our time in the States. So I guess that's one way to illustrate that by coming together and learning about other people, we can often find things that we have in common with people who we otherwise may have thought that we had absolutely nothing in common with. So I guess that comes back to my earlier comment about constructive conversations, about dialogue, and about bringing diverse groups of people together so that we can find ways to connect on our shared humanity. I think they're really important things to do.
Yeah, thank you so much for responding these five questions. They're very important and giving you precious time. The topic was certainly very important, bridging the divide, race, identity, and justice in Aotearoa. Certainly wonderful. And you talked about the commission, race relation commission, facing related challenges in New Zealand. Your background in academia and research, how it turns out to be instrumental in the expansion of human rights, and how it resonates with the very philosophy of Baba community and multicultural societies also in New Zealand and their dynamics, how it is compatible. And storytelling, this is, for me, frankly speaking, for the very first time, sort of, understanding the relevance of it, having come across this statement of yours. So very, very important discussion. I mean, this is certainly a wonderful discussion. So as you're already familiar that RESO is a platform where we try to step through the noise to pursue most reliable and relevant sociological possibilities and explanations and narratives on different topics. There may be human rights, human trafficking, gender issues, women development, overall development, different text, globally we try to cover. That's the reason you're on board. We should have approached you. And once again, thank you so much, ma'am, giving you precious time and joining the platform.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.